So, welcome, and I'm so glad both of you could make this. Okay, I'm going to start with Helen Mirren and ask about the fact that since you were last here, 3 Oscar nominations, you won the Academy Award, obviously, for The Queen, but you've also been in so many wonderful films that I've even previewed here at the Y, like Gosford Park with Robert Altman, or The Pledge, Sean Penn, and last year, no, just actually 6 months ago, how fortunate we were to preview The Last Station with Christopher Plummer and Michael Hoffman. Now, I'm going to ask a weird question. Is it true, or is it no longer true, that there are no good parts easily to find for women over 40? Or is it that you and Meryl Streep are the exceptions? I mean, what has happened? Is it just you, or is it now possible for women to have juicier parts?
I think it's cyclical, isn't it? I mean, everyone always goes back to the films of the 30s and the 40s to see those great roles that because the roles were so great, the roles in a sense, or the great actresses created the great roles, or maybe it was the other way around. What is absolutely for certain, and I've always said this, you cannot do a great performance without a great role, you know, and it's the role, really, and the reason we had the Barbara Stanwicks and the Joan Crawfords and the Betty Davises is because they were given great roles, so we were allowed to see what they were capable of. I think we are going through maybe a little bit of a golden age. I would look at a lot of the work on British television anyway, and indeed a lot of the work on American television, on cable, and you see some really wonderful roles for women. So I think we are going through quite a good period. I mean, I've always said, when people said to me in the past, you know, why aren't there great roles for women? You know, where are all the great roles for women? I say, forget about the great roles for women. Find great roles for women in life. And then, as night follows day, you will have great roles for women on screen or in drama in general. And I think that's happening. You know, with the power, the burgeoning power of women in politics, in business, more and more on television. If there's a CEO of a big company, it's often, much more often than it used to be anyway, a woman. I think it's those things that are impinging upon the sort of the dramatic representation of women.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you about one particular film. I'm guessing that not many people in this audience have seen it, but as with the Woody Allen evening, I expect that tomorrow Netflix is going to get a lot of hits for certain titles that may not be that familiar to you. All right, a few months ago there was so much hoopla about a movie called Precious, and its director Lee Daniels, who received an Oscar nomination. But this was not his directorial debut. That was Shadowboxer in 2005, a really edgy and controversial drama in which Helen Mirren plays an assassin involved in an incestuous relationship with her stepson, played by Cuba Gooding Jr.
I did.
True?
True, yes.
And I was curious, you know, what led you to, did you just intuitively trust that this first-time director, who had obviously done magnificent work as a producer, Monsters Ball, among others, what led you to accept that part?
Well, the writing, you know, it was written by the man who wrote Monsters Ball, Will Rokas, wonderful writer who writes just the most unexpected kind of relationships, as you just described. And, you know, I love that. I love it. And, you know, I bumped into Lee Daniels here in New York. Well, he kind of accosted me, really. I was walking down West Houston, as you call it, looking down at my feet because, I'd call it Houston, but yeah, I know it's Houston. Looking down at my feet because it's full of potholes, isn't it? I think it probably still is. So you fall over very quickly. So I was kind of, you know, watching where I was, and suddenly I had a tap on the shoulder, and I turned around, and there was this black guy with big dreadlocks. He said, "I love you, I love you." I said, "Oh, thank you, that's very kind of you. Yes, I love you, and you know what?" And he said it with an American accent, which I'm not very good at. I've got a movie for you. I know, he says, I know you think I'm talking off the top of my head, and who the hell am I? And I'm just this guy on the street. But I promise you, I've got a role for you in a movie. And my name is Lee Daniels. And off he went. And it was about a year later, you know, I got a call from him or his representative saying, this is the role in Shadowboxer. So it was the sort of the memory of that wonderful meeting that just made me want to work with him.
I don't know that anyone here should take this as a sign to accost actors in the street, but...
No, true, but I don't know. He's got a very special spirit,
Yeah.
Lee, absolutely. He's very seductive in the right sort of way. And I had loved Monsters Ball. Yeah. There was a history there.
You know, this is it's always interesting about history and how it's perceived. Will Rokas I'd worked with, and he's a wonderful writer, and he sent me a script, this film, Shadowboxer, saying he'd written the role for Helen. Yeah. And at the time, another director was involved. And I read the script and liked it and gave it to Helen, and she loved it. Subsequently, that director fell out, and the producer stepped into the director's role. And I don't mind saying this because Lee is a friend, and I really, really think he's a very talented man. But when someone, you know, quite mercurial and having been a producer who's never directed a film before, my response was, baby, I don't know. And that's when Lee accosted her in the street. And then, yes, it was. And then the reality.
Marriage.
Well, but the fact is, the important thing about this is a director is a director is a director, and Lee would not be denied. And we know from Precious what a fabulous director he is. So in his own way, I never said don't, but I said be careful. She met him, she liked him, he convinced her, and she did the film. So it's fascinating, but she remembers it a different way.
By the way, Shadowboxer, to me, in retrospect, is fascinating not only for your wonderful performance, but in that film, Monique, who won the Best Supporting Actress for Precious, plays a character whose name is Precious. So there's an interesting continuity. By the way, is it true that Lee Daniels wanted you to play in Precious the part of the social worker that was played by Mariah Carey?
I think, you know, I was doing a play in London, Phaedra, at the National Theatre. So I was, you know, absolutely committed. And I think he did sort of check my availability.
He wanted her to play it. He called me.
Yes, he did call me.
And I just had to say, you know, she's working. She was. And at the end, when the film came out, he somehow had gotten the thing that she turned him down. I said, Lee, she never turns you down. When you ask for somebody's available and they're working for 6 months and you're not going to shoot, it wasn't. But, you know, look what gave Mariah Carey a great opportunity.
And no one could have been better in that role than Mariah.
By the way, you know, you could have said to Lee Daniels that you blame him for the fact that she was doing Phaedra, because I just realized in Phaedra, this is Racine's great tragic play, Phaedra confesses her love to her stepson,
That's true.
Hippolyte,
Yes.
which is a continuation of Shadowboxer. Okay, I'm going to move on
He
to a
does turn
question
her
for
down, though, you know. He's
Yes.
horrified.
Yeah, and it's with tragic consequences.
Can I
might
just
add.
say something about Shadowboxer that I think is interesting? A lot of black people stop me on the street and say, oh, you're in one of my favorite movies, in Shadowboxer. And they never talk about the fact that I was having a relationship with a man much, much younger than myself, or that I was having a relationship, a white woman with a black man. They just say, we love that movie. And it's just very interesting that no comment within the black community that I'm aware of was ever made of either of those issues. And I wonder if the black community is much more open-minded than the white community.
Or maybe the kind of people who go to see a movie like Shadowboxer, as opposed to the latest raucous comedy, Chris Rock, whatever, it's, you know, a kind of self-selection. Maybe this is the elite of the cinematic or cinephile black community, I don't know.
Well, I don't know. They're always immensely generous to me, I have to say.
Sure. Now, I have a question for Taylor Hackford, because I think you are such a remarkable, consistently powerful dramatic storyteller. But I think one of the reasons you've never been called an auteur, really, is that you can't be pigeonholed Your films, both stylistically and thematically, are not of one recognizable cloth, and your versatility is almost an undoing in a certain critical sense. But I did want to talk a little about the way that you approach or the way you choose some of your films. For example, your last movie was Ray, obviously based on real people, Ray Charles notably. And Love Ranch begins with inspired by a true story. This audience has not yet seen the film. That's going to happen in about 45 minutes, but no, I'm sorry, that's not true. That's going to happen in about an hour. To what extent is the film that we're about to see a true story, and how much would you call it a fiction?
When you make a film that is based on somebody very, very famous, like Ray, and since, in fact, it's got his music throughout and it's basically his biography, I felt very bound to try to tell the story as accurately as I could, although, and Ray was aware of this, I did take some dramatic license, because within scenes where you've got characters who are some living, some dead, and there's real interchange between characters, I wasn't there. We created, I wrote the story, and Jimmy White was the screenwriter. We created those sequences. Ray read the script and basically gave us his okay, but he knew we were taking dramatic license. But still, I think I can go back and hit the antecedents of every single scene in that film. This film, I felt we needed to do something different, and when you see the film, and I don't want to give it away, but it has a very major climactic moment that it was reported widely, but there was a controversy about it. And in my sense of doing this film, that's principally why I made it inspired by. It's why we took dramatic license. The culmination in it's three main characters that are caught up, three cynical professionals who you never think would be possibly capable of falling, letting their emotions take charge, and that's what happens. But the climactic moment, I wanted to make it clear that the Joe Pesci character acted. And that's not exactly what the facts were, although we don't know what the facts were because he controlled the entire legal system in northern Nevada, and in fact, who knows? But in this instance, when you want to make a statement that you believe is emotionally true, you take that liberty. And I couldn't exactly say it is a docudrama, a true story. Right. So it gave us an opportunity, and there's a couple of things. The boxer in the film was based on Oscar Bonavena. There are a couple of elements of that story that we took dramatic license with that relates to another South American, in fact, Argentine boxer, Carlos Monzon. So I put two characters together. Mark Jacobson and I put two characters together. There was enough need for us to deal with the dramatic license that I felt we shouldn't say that it's actually, but when you see the film, most of the facts are true.
And certainly, the characters played by Joe Pesci and Helen Mirren, Grace and Joe Bontempo, are modeled on Joe and Sally Conforti, who were very famous. I think they were the cover story of Rolling Stone at some point in the 1970s because they owned and operated the first legal brothel in Nevada. So that's a little bit of a milestone for those who are interested in the sex industry in the United States, and after tonight in cinematic history as well.
Well, there were some, you think about this country, which is founded on the Puritan ethic, and we live in a country that has been very uptight about sex. We know the Europeans. We used to go to European films because they dealt with sexuality in a franker way than Hollywood could ever deal with it. But for Joe and Sally Conforti to actually defeat 200 years of Puritan uptight morality and get prostitution legalized in that state was a major accomplishment. I mean, in his own way, Joe Conforti actualized his American dream, in the sense of this, and he had a monopoly. I mean, they had a license to print money. So it's an interesting thing. To me, my interest in the story was not their success story, was interest in a morality tale about what happens when you actualize your dream. What happens, how do you handle success? And those are the things that are more interesting.
Right. Could you talk a little about the casting of Joe Pesci, who I don't think I've seen on screen for about 10 years after remarkable work in films like Goodfellas, Casino, My Cousin Vinny. How did that come about?
I really could think of no one else to play this role. Joe Conforte was a small, peripatetic man from the Northeast. He had gone west. He drove a cab in Reno. But I said he had this dream. He is not, this was an interesting thing to me because he was not a tough guy. He was a promoter. He was a huckster. He was a dreamer. And he had this indefatigable spirit of going out and trying to convince the people in northern Nevada to legalize prostitution. Joe Pesci has that same energy. He has that same focus. And, he's a small man with a big personality. And he just was the person I had in my mind. Now, he had gone into a kind of self-imposed exile. Joe told me, and it's a fact, he doesn't find acting easy. He finds it painful. And when he goes into a role, he truly gets into this situation. And it's not, I wouldn't say it's torture for him, but it's not like, falling off a log. And he didn't, he has a lot of interests. He's an incredibly talented musician. You just have no idea. You think Joe Pesci. When Jamie and I were prepping Ray, I went up to Quincy Jones's house. Quincy's an old friend of mine, and he was very receptive because he'd known Ray since he was a boy, and Jamie was happy. And then Quincy said, "Hey, I want you to hear something. Put something on." And we listened to this jazz singer, and he was fantastic. And Q said, "This is the best jazz singer I've heard in 10 years. And guess who it is?" And Jamie and I said, "Oh, Bobby McFerrin." We started naming jazz singers. He said, "Nope, all wrong. He's an actor. It's Joe Pesci." And who's to know? And then I said, "Well, why don't we hear from him? Because he only does it for himself. He doesn't go out and perform. He doesn't do this." But if Quincy Jones felt that way, you know how good he was. All I'm saying is that Joe does lots of things, and he doesn't have to act. But I basically went there and wouldn't stop until he agreed. I mean, you have to sometimes. And he understood this was a great role because it's different. It's not him in Casino. It's not him in Goodfellas. He is a guy who has been he's been on the other side of the law, because when you run illegal brothels, which Joe and Sally did for years before they got it legalized, he's been to prison, he knows things. But he's not that cold-blooded killer. And I think what I was interested in from his point of view, he gets to a level of emotion at the end of this film that I've never seen him give. And that was the point of getting there. It's about watching people who you never think could lose control and let their emotions take over, and they all three get there.
Yeah. I'm going to ask Helen Mirren about this, because I remember at the Telluride Film Festival not more than, 6 months ago, when you talked about The Last Station during the interview with Ken Burns, actually, you were very insistent about the script. You just do the script. In other words, the whole notion of improvisation, spontaneity, that wasn't really your thing. But when I think of Joe Pesci, the immediate image that comes to mind, especially the way he worked with Scorsese, it's very much improvisation and spontaneity. I'm curious, how did you work together? I mean, because I sense two very different styles here.
No, I mean, in certain films, I improvise a lot. It depends on the nature of the film, the nature of the script. Michael Hoffman's script was very precise. And very beautifully constructed, and different scripts demand different things, really. A script by Harold Pinter is a very different thing from, do you know what I mean? Oh, yeah. From a film with Robert Altman, so you change your approach to the work accordingly, really. I've often improvised in films. I'm certainly not averse to that, and it's enjoyable, but it's only when it's appropriate and right. And Joe, although he improvises, but he improvises very much around the script. He doesn't improvise off, it's not fantastical and off message, so to speak. It's very much to do with the scene, with the script, and I think maybe that's why I'm not saying he finds acting hard, because he doesn't. He's a brilliant actor, and it comes naturally to him. But he puts such an intense energy into it, because he prepares and prepares, and then, like a volcano, it just kind of bursts out, and then it's out, and that's it. He can't do it again. Do you know what I mean? He prepares for that moment, I think, quite intensely, and then the moment comes. But he's not about to recreate that moment over and over and over again. I suspect. I don't know. Do you think I'm right?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that in this instance, I found that Annette, you're totally right. They come from two entirely different styles, but their commitment is total, both of them, from whatever style, and they really enjoyed. It was fantastic to watch them, because you say, oh, Joe Pesci and Helen Mirren, and you watch the eyebrows rise, And at the same time, they're playing a husband-wife team. They're playing two very seasoned professionals whose relationship has gone past the point of whatever romance might have been there to professional relationship, and they deal with each other. It's a harsh film. It's a harsh reality that we're talking about. But when they worked together, there was an inner life, there was a history, and there was this engagement that they both felt. And frankly, after the takes and you did a scene, there was excitement on both their parts. They kind of came out of it not, just kind of like, yeah, we got something. That was, when we work together, Helen and I, we really separate ourselves. You have to. In this particular instance, I have great actors in this film. And you can't have Helen by me at the camera saying, how do you feel about this take? If that happens, you're not going to get anything from your actors. She has to engage them as a professional actor. So we never had lunch together. We didn't deal with each other on the set. We slept together at night, but that was it. But ultimately, that process was ongoing. And when you saw all of the actors engage, they did, and that's what you want as a director. You want them to work. And there was some, pardon the expression, but Joe Pesci is the ultimate poet of the word fuck. We all know that. We've all seen him. And in this instance, I had to kind of say, was it right for the film? In this character, yes. And, inevitably you'll hear that word a lot in this film. It has an R rating, not for particular sex, but for the language. But in its own way, he uses it as this unbelievable adjective that kind of fits everything. And it doesn't just...
I think he also uses it as an adverb and as a noun.
Everything.
Everything.
But in reality, it is something that it isn't just indiscriminate. He knows where to place it with a certain thing. And he's famous for it. He said he was in Jersey walking down the street one day, and some guy pulled up in the car next to him, and his wife was in the car, and he says, "Hey, Joe, cuss at my wife." He wanted a little taste of that poetry. But in reality, to see Helen and Joe together is really fantastic, because they got into their roles and they're believable. And again, I don't think this is I think the thing that attracted Helen, because frankly, I wanted to work with my wife after 26 years. But I had, a director can do one film every 2 years if you're lucky. She can do 4 films in a year. And I was looking for something, and I'd offered her, I'm doing Ray, there's nothing for her to do. Devil's Advocate is a small part. She says, thank you.
I did want to play Ray's mother.
That would have been...
He turned me down.
Yeah. However, I had a great actress play his mother. But in any event, in that instance, I looked for something, and this was, but it's not something, and I think the thing that attracted her was, she played Elizabeth I and Elizabeth II in the same year, brilliantly. In fact, she thinks Elizabeth I is her best role. But, you can get typecast there. I know actors, they go after things they can try to go into and try to make something new, and this role intrigued her.
Yeah. And it's also playing an American, which is, a little bit different from the majority of parts that you've played lately. I think in Critical Care, because I remember Sidney Lumet made this rather quirky film that I liked quite a bit, but no one saw it, about, 10 years ago or more.
About the health
Yeah.
system. Interesting,
Which
you know,
today
radical
would
film.
have a whole new resonance
Yeah,
given
absolutely.
healthcare reform possibility. But could you talk maybe a little bit about how important, if at all, research was, whether it was research in terms of the character based on Sally Conforti, research in terms of what being a madam is like, especially in terms of interactions with the girls, in other words, the prostitutes who are kind of your family in a sense. Research in terms of the diction, you know, how important was that, or was it more just the script gave you what you needed?
No, I think research on this was pretty important. You know, to me, Nevada in the 70s is an incredibly exotic locale and something I know, you know, as a Brit, really nothing about, and is kind of, you know, weird and wonderful to me, and that was a part of the appeal of the story and the script. I didn't feel, because we were not doing a docudrama about Sally Conforti and Joe, it was you know, there was dramatic license being taken. I certainly didn't feel I had to sort of channel Sally Conforti, try and look like her, talk like her, you know, anything. So I put that to one side. But it was important for me to do research, and Taylor was absolutely right. You know, he's the kind of director who absolutely will give an actor, any actor, all the tools that they need to prepare their performance. And he felt very strongly that I should go and spend some time in a brothel to see what it was like. Not working, I might add. Although no. And he'd already done it. He'd made a relationship with the present-day Mustang Ranch and the madam, Susan Austin, and the owners, Lance and Susan. And he'd been there and done his research. And then he said, not like that. Did you, darling? Anyway. And he felt I should do the same, and I just didn't want to do it. I just said, no, I'm not going, Taylor. No. I'd watched Louis Theroux's very good documentary on YouTube, actually. But it's a good documentary he made for British television. He was in the Mustang Ranch for months, living with them. So that was a very good research. And I thought that was enough. But he said, no, you've got to spend some time there. So screaming and kicking, I went. And of course it was absolutely invaluable and very, very, very important, and I'm really glad I did that. You know, accent, voice, well, you know, I worked with people, and again, Taylor really kind of, you know, beat me about the head on that one and sort of said, no, it's not good enough. No, metaphorically, yes. And, you know, was very strict about me trying to get it right.
Okay. And actually, the screenplay is credited to Mark Jacobson, who's a journalist, mainly with New York Magazine, and who actually wrote an article that was the basis for the movie American Gangsta about 2 years ago. You never take screen credit, but I'm guessing that you get involved in the actual screenwriting process, at least after the first few drafts. Was it, to some extent, your input that boxing became almost as kind of palpably, viscerally exciting in this film as the whole question of the brothel, or was that all in the script already?
No, I have to give Mark, you know, what happens is that I had a very, very dear friend from New York, great journalist from New York named Jack Newfield, who worked for years and years at the Voice, and you know, was a fantastic man and a very dear friend of mine. And I love the fight game. So anytime there was a great fight, Jack lived downtown, and we would get together at Jack's house, and it was a fantastic group, you know, of people, you know, anybody from Jose Torres, you know, ex-champion, to Bud Schulberg, to various people that are, you know, passionate about the fight game. And we watch it at Joe's. And two people that were always there, Mark Jacobson, who was a protege of Jack's at the Voice, now writes for New York Magazine, and a fellow named Lou DiBella, who is a boxing promoter himself. And one day I got a call from Mark and Lou saying they'd partnered up on something, and Mark had written a spec script. Well, it had elements in it that I just, like I said, I'd always looked at this story about the Gioconforte Oscar Bonavena, and I'd not given credence or thought about the woman. And Mark, and I give him credit, made her the centerpiece, which I thought was fascinating. That's why I took it to Helen. But I don't want to take the credit for the fact that they wrote a piece about boxing, because we all are boxing.
Because you were a producer on the documentary When We Were Kings.
Let me just say, I made When We Were Kings.
Yeah.
I mean, Leon Gass got the credit. He shot the film originally. I'm sorry to say this, but I made the film. Because I got involved in it, I found it, I cut it together. I had final cut of it. I did all the interviews with Mailer and Plimpton and Spike and our friend who was from Africa, Malik Bowens. And I put it together, but those guys got up and received the Academy Award for it, which was one of those painful moments. But the fact is, those are things that happen. I wanted to do that film because Muhammad Ali was the great hero of my generation. And I wanted my two sons to understand what a great person he was. I mean, he embodies to me what American heroism is. He's brash, incredibly talented, funny, screwed up, all those things that Ali was. He's the biggest movie star there ever was. So, I did make that film, and I won the Academy Award, and it was my paean, yes, for my sons, but I also made that film for women. And in a strange way, because women hate boxing, most of them. They think it's brutal and it's horrible and so on. But I thought it was important to say, when there's a great champion, that champion is not a champion because of brawn. The champion is a champion because he uses his head over and over again and his heart. The heart is bigger than the brawn. The brain is the one that works. And Ali won that fight against George Foreman. He shouldn't have won it. He's 10 years older. Foreman was much stronger, much more powerful fighter. But Ali he outthought, and he won it intellectually. And I think in the film I portray that. And to me, when people that don't like the boxing game see that film, they can understand for the first time, oh my God, it wasn't just brawn that won. It was maturity and intelligence and strategy. And in this film, the thing that interested me, and again, Mark, I give full credit to starting it out, it's about flesh. It's a crass film. It's, if you're looking for some romanticized version of, people like to say, oh, brothels are so erotic. They're so, there's such fantasy there. No, they're not erotic. It's a business. I mean, it's a business of selling sex, and it's a cynical business. I make films about working class people. All my films are about working class people. So I was interested in looking at this issue, and the fact that the flesh business, of course, prostitution, but what do you think professional prize fighting is? It's the flesh business, the selling of flesh in its own way. And in this kind of metaphor, to then say that, in this world, can people who are past the point of feeling any kind of emotional, life, can they, in fact, succumb to their hearts, have their hearts take over? And that's what the premise of the film was. And I did get involved with Mark, and I did work with him on the script, as I do in all my films. But, when someone's come to you with a script, I mean, I wrote the story. Then I didn't feel that my voice was right. I mean, I think you had a black writer to write that film, and Jimmy White did a terrific job, and took the story that I wrote and went with it. But you get intensely involved because I know the dramatic scenes, and in this film, there are two moments that are very important. There's a love scene that you will see that is very important to the plot. It's the catalyst where two characters truly come together that you would never expect, and the fight is a climactic moment. It's not the climax of the film, but it is a moment where everything changes. And Joe Pesci's character, who begins the film with this fantastic, he's on top of the world. He has accomplished the impossible. He has a license to print money. He's partaking in everything that he could possibly do and wallowing in it in his own way. And at that point, the fight happens. He changes from that kind of character to almost a Shakespearean tragedy. The world just, drops on him. And in the fight, and I warn you in advance, it's a brutal fight, because Oscar Bonavena was a great fighter, but he didn't have the skills of the sweet art of boxing. Muhammad Ali did. Muhammad Ali could dance. He had a great punch, but he was so beautiful to watch move in the ring that you could get mesmerized by this man, regardless of the brutality of boxing. Oscar Bonavena was a fighter, but he was the champion of South America. He came to the United States in the 1970s, which was the era of the greatest heavyweight fighters in history, and he fought the best of the best. He knocked Joe Frazier down twice in the second round, almost knocked him out. But he had no style. He could punch, and he could take a punch. And in this fight, you want to watch that process, because I did it from 3 points of view. When you've got Marty's Raging Bull, which is a masterpiece, and he did boxing beautifully, you've got a lot to live up to. And I know the sport, and I wanted to shoot it that way, but I shot it from 3 different points of view. From Joe's point of view, from Helen's point of view, they all have different intents here. And from Bruce's point of view in the ring. And I got Jimmy Nickerson, who helped Marty stage Raging Bull, and he came and helped me this. It's probably one of his last pieces. But it's a dramatic scene. And as such, I wanted it to say a particular amount. It's not a boxing film, but it has one very strong boxing element.
Well, I think this film has an intense physicality because in addition to the scenes of female flesh on display in the brothel, the sense of male flesh on display in the ring is really something very palpable. And I have a friend in Buenos Aires, and when I told him via email that I was doing this evening with you, he not only sent me the photos of Oscar Bonavena with Charles Aznavour that he took in the late 60s, but he also told me a lot about Bonavena, which I found fascinating. And apparently in Argentina, some people didn't know whether to take Bonavena seriously because he was a loud and boisterous clown. He was called Ringo.
Like Ali.
Like Ali, except they started to take him seriously after he fought the then called Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali. And even though he lost, he suddenly became much more respectable in a sense. And he would apparently come up with these homemade proverbs like wisdom comes late in life. It's like receiving a comb when you're already bald.
It's true.
That's
it's true.
credited to him,
True.
right? And
Right.
he also said that Bonavena was very fond of visiting his mother every Sunday for pasta, and that he would always talk about his mother. So, I found this fascinating as background information in watching the film, and I do want to mention that we've been concentrating so far in our discussion on, obviously, Helen Mirren and Joe Pesci. But this is a triangular sort of film, and the character Armando Brusa, who is based on Oscar Bonavena, is played really formidably by a newcomer, an actor from Spain named Sergio Peris-Mencheta. And he happens to be here with us tonight. I just wanted to acknowledge him. If you would just stand up so that everybody can see you. So I do want to ask about working with him, because this is the first English language film for an actor who's done quite a bit of work in Spain and even in France and Italy. First of all, how you chose him for this part, and by the way, choosing a Spanish actor to play an Argentine boxer is not an obvious choice, and also how you worked with him, given that you both have theater backgrounds. Was it a bit, more coherent perhaps than with Joe Pesci?
Let me start by saying this is not a duet, it is a trio. And when you have Joe Pesci and Helen Mirren, consummate actors, you need to find somebody who can stay in the scene with them. And it's not an easy task. Second of all, Bonavena was not Chicano, he wasn't American Latin, he was from South America, and very distinctive. They called him the Raging Bull, not the Raging Bull, the Wild Bull of the Pampas. And he was this kind of he had this bravura style, very funny, and at the same time he got in the ring and was a force. And I started looking around with actors in the United States and was having no luck whatsoever. I then opened it up internationally, and Mark Jacobson showed me a picture of Sergio, just a picture, and he has this wonderful animal magnetism in his face. Pardon me, Sergio, but you do. And And I then online, this is the great thing about the internet, I online found some of his work in Spanish, because he'd done films only in France and in Spain, and he looked right. And so I got a number for him, and I called him, and I said, are you coming to the United States? I told him about the project. He did speak enough English to communicate with me. And he said he was going to Mexico on a pilgrimage with his girlfriend, and he stopped in Los Angeles. And this is just fantastic, because you realize you can only make this film if you've got 3 characters, and I was bankrupt. There was nothing in this role that we found, no one that could play it. And he came to our house in Los Angeles, and we read, Helen and he read in our living room. And I had a little digital camera I was using, and it was just, when these things happen, they happen. And you know, I shot it, and I saw choices he made. And Mark Jacobson was there, and he loved it because Sergio got all the jokes, you know. But I was looking at the interior, the things that I knew that he was hiding, that the character of Bruce was hiding, and Sergio just had a way of doing it, and it was so beautiful. So then we finished, and I asked Helen, you know, what do you think? And she said,
I said, that's it. We don't have to look any further. We've got him. It's fantastic. Because I was working with Sergio here, and you know, his face is here, and also we were having to do. You made us do some of the love scenes, didn't you? Then.
Well, let's say the kissing scenes.
The kissing scenes. But you know, poor Sergio. You know, he walks in. We're complete strangers. I'm his wife. You know, and he's like, he must think, oh, well, these are weird. Maybe they're swingers. You know, really, they're just like recording, and then I'll never hear anything ever again. Did you think that, Sergio? I hope not. But anyway, you know, brilliant. Just it was all there. You know, when you're this close to someone, you see it in the eyes. And you see the thought on the face, just wonderful. I knew he was a great actor, was all I knew.
I mean, the thing is, you don't know about the past of somebody. I subsequently found out, you know, both Helen and Sergio work with Peter Brook.
Yeah,
I mean,
funny.
we're talking about some people of substantial art, you know, ambition, and the theater. But, you know, there were so many things that were right. Sergio has never boxed, but he's physical. He was the captain of the Spanish rugby team when he was in college. He has all of these elements that he had prepared for, and this role was, you know, as I said, a great role makes a great actor. You know, without that, an actor can't show anything. And this film is not who Sergio is, but he knew what it needed to be. He came to New York. He went to Gleason's gym in Brooklyn, one of the great boxing gyms. He trained with Jimmy Glynn, a fabulous, fabulous boxing trainer. He gained 35 pounds for the role, much in the way De Niro did for Raging Bull. And he worked and worked and worked.
And he learned English, and to act in a foreign language, I know, is like acting in a suit of armor. It's so difficult. It's because your instincts can't fly, you know. So he was dealing with that. And then he has some Spanish to speak in the film. Well, he's Spanish. He speaks Spanish. You'd think there he might be able to relax. No. He has to speak Spanish with an Argentinian accent. He has to speak Argentinian Spanish, which, you know, is so, and from what I understand, our Argentinian friends say that it's immaculate. He's absolutely, they didn't know that he wasn't Argentinian.
I mean, Sergio went to...
you know, his work was absolutely prodigious.
We didn't have a lot of money in this film, and he doesn't make a lot of money. He just went to Buenos Aires at Christmas because he had to walk in the neighborhood of Bonavena. He had to hear Argentine Spanish. You know, these are the kinds of things that, as a director, are gifts. As I said, you can give everybody the tools, but you can't force them to pick them up. And an actor who is dedicated, an actor who says, I know what I'm going to have to do on screen, is such a gift. Well, I had it with Helen Mirren and Joe Pesci, and very luckily. So we're saying also in advance, but I'm saying it because I'm extremely proud to have discovered somebody in this instance that I think you will see for a long time. He's truly, truly talented.
Now, Helen recently said in a New York Magazine article, I noticed this quote, that about the women who work in the sex industry, they put themselves out of their bodies. An actor does sort of the opposite. Could you elaborate on that a bit? Could you talk about, what it is that an actor does that is the opposite of?
Well, a phrase that actors use a lot is being in the moment. And what they mean by being in the moment is being utterly psychologically and physically hyper aware of what they have to do in that moment. And I don't know, I've never worked as a prostitute, but I think that what they do is the exact opposite. They take themselves out of the moment. They put themselves a long way away from the moment of sex. They're doing this intimate thing with this stranger, and it's happening, but they are somewhere quite away. They're going through the motion, but their minds are out of their bodies. They're somewhere else. I think that that's what happens to a great extent anyway. And certainly, the thing, I always think it's so fascinating thing of human behavior that the one thing prostitutes won't do is kiss. They'll do anything else, but they won't kiss, because kissing is intimate. And in kissing, I guess you have to be, in a sense, in the moment.
They kiss their boyfriends.
They kiss their boyfriends. They won't kiss anyone else. And I think that's a sort of fascinating, a sweet thing about human nature in general. But so yes, I think that. I think prostitutes are actresses in a sense. They're kind of performing a role, but the way in which they perform it, I think, is very different from how actors perform roles.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have about 20 more questions that I obviously will not ask because I want to leave at least a few minutes for people in the audience to ask a few questions. Okay, we have one down here, and I will repeat them.
Ms. Mirren, I think that you should have won an Oscar for The Cook, the Thief.
I think you should have won an Oscar, Helen Mirren, for The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, Her Lover.
And when you got the script for that, were you disturbed by the dark nature of the script?
When you got the script for that, were you disturbed by its rather dark nature?
I was deeply disturbed by it. It's a deeply disturbing film. But on the other hand, I think Peter Greenaway is an artist, and artists very often do address dark things. It's kind of their job in our society. And it was a beautifully written script. It was like reading a piece of literature. It was really an amazing piece of work. And so, I closed my eyes and I jumped in and kind of hoped for the best.
It worked. Are there, if not, I'm just going to ask one or two more because I want to, but yes?
I'm curious, how has this international fame of yours affected you as a human being and your family and friends, their attitude towards you now that you are so...
The question for Helen Mirren is, how has this international fame affected you and those close to you, your family, your friends?
Of course, the great thing about family and friends is they've known you forever, so they don't... They kind of enjoy the peripheries of that, but they don't take it seriously. And nor should they, You're still... I'm hell to my friends. I mean, they call me hell. So it's, oh, hell, oh, hell, you're doing really great. That's fantastic. And to my family, obviously, my family immensely supportive in exactly the right way, which is completely unsycophantic. For myself, I kind of ignore it, really. I mean, I'm not very famous anyway, but I'm not. I catch the bus in London, I go to the supermarket, here. I carry on absolutely as I always have done, honestly.
But I think
I schlep my own bags in the airport, and
the thing that's kind of interesting, however, is especially in terms of the movies, most people reach fame much earlier in life.
Yes, that's true.
I mean, they come into this period of time of, quote, movie stardom, and they're in their 20s or early 30s, 20s for women, 30s for men. And Helen, that didn't happen. I mean, when she and I got together, I have a career in Hollywood, and she came to Hollywood, and it was amazing, because I'm turned on by talent, as you can see. And she was well known in England, but we'd go places, and people would come up, Taylor this, and who is this person? Seriously, and it was, it's painful. You can imagine, a great artist, and she's no better now than she was then. She was great then, but didn't have the roles, and Hollywood wasn't interested. So to watch this process happen as life goes on, and see Prime Suspect go out into the world and make a name for her that people then went to. And then see the roles evolve, and the work continue to be great. So that in fact the roles, the tables have turned. Now we're together, and people come up and it's Helen Mirren. I don't resent that at all. I mean, I love my wife. I really love the fact that she has had such incredible success. And it's just fantastic that it's happened when it's happened, because it's very rare. You know that.
I know,
Annette.
I'm so aware. And I actually went to IMDb just to check something, and I suddenly saw that you had 6 films that are presumably coming out within the next year. And one of them particularly piqued my interest because it's Julie Taymor's Tempest, in which you play Prospero. And I had heard from somebody, then I remembered this, that you were the one who had the idea to change Prospero into a female character, a little bit of a witch. Is that true?
Yes, yes. I think Julie actually had synonymously had the same idea. I'd just seen The Tempest and a wonderful actor playing Prospero, but as I'd been watching it, I'd been thinking, actually, this could be played by a woman. You wouldn't really have to change very much. You wouldn't have to change very much in the dialogue at all. And it would work really well as a woman. So it's been in the back, and I've been thinking in the back of my mind, maybe one day I'll go to someone and say, why don't we do The Tempest and I'll play Prospero. I thought in the theatre. And very shortly after that, I met Julie Taymor for the first time. And, I told her how much I admired her. And she said, we must work together sometime. What would you like to do? So I said, well, I've been thinking it'd be kind of fun to do The Tempest, thinking, again, the theatre. She said, absolutely, I'd love to do that. I've directed it twice already in the theatre. I think I've always thought it would work well with a woman. End of story. I thought she went away, and I was convinced, this would never happen. And about a year later, she calls up and she says, okay, are you still up for it? Because I think we're going to do it. I said, oh, that's great. Where? Thinking like the Atlantic Theatre, or something. She said, we're going to make a movie. I've got the money to make a movie. I was absolutely gobstruck, as we say in England, and terrified. Oh my God, what have I let myself in for? But it was fantastic. It was a great, great experience. Really wonderful to.
And I noticed that the cast includes some amazing actors from rather different contexts. People like Russell Brand and Alfred Molina on the one hand, and then there was Alan Cumming and Jimon Hunsu and David Strathairn and Ben Whishaw. I mean, my mind just boggled when I saw that entire cast under your auspices.
Yes, it's a great, great cast.
Yeah. And if you look at IMDb, by the way, you're barraged by images of Helen Mirren with Morgan Freeman and Bruce Willis and John Malkovich in a movie called Red, which clearly is not to be confused with one of my favorite films of all time, Kieślowski's Red. It is very much a big, I think, Hollywood action thriller.
Yes, yes.
Are those as much fun for you to do as the intimate, small scale?
Sometimes they're more fun. It's just great to be able to mix it up. It's just great. And it's great not very often in the smaller films. I have the weight of the film sometimes on my shoulders, and I feel that responsibility. In those bigger films, I'm just one, I would say it's great to be number 5 on the call sheet, not number 1, because you can relax a bit, But it was, I very much enjoyed that.
Good. Is there a hand that I'm missing? All the way in the back, yes?
This question is for Taylor. I want to know if you're still directing the Tennessee Williams movie?
Are you still directing the Tennessee Williams movie?
The answer is not yet. I developed it, and I hope to do it. It's very very difficult, and like I said, I do it in a second because it's a fantastic story. When I say fantastic story, the story is the story, but it takes it up through the success of the Glass Menagerie, and then it's over. But it's a period piece. It's a piece that, if you know Tennessee, he was a wanderer. In the early part of his life, he was in all of these different places, and to be able to shoot that, you need to go to certain places. You need to. It's a big story, and I don't want to spend a lot of money on it, but I don't think I can make it for $8 million. So, you go out in the community and you've got something you think is terrific. Hollywood is very mean on those levels. So I hope to make it sometime.
He's asking because he happens to look exactly like a
That's
young
the way to
Tennessee
do it.
Williams.
Well, you know what? Let me make sure that I'm actually going to make it, and then we'll meet.
Okay, I think we have one more over here on the right. Yes?
I'm watching the movie that you made a few years ago, and I wonder, in terms of memory going back, what it was like for you to work with James Mason. I was watching Age of Consent.
Oh, Lord, yes.
The question is about the film Age of Consent, which Helen Mirren made with James Mason. Could you talk about working
Yes.
with him?
That was the first film I'd ever made, and it was an incredible, amazing experience. I was so lucky for that to be my first film experience. Of course, I didn't appreciate it at the time, because I was 22 years old. So, I just took it all for granted. James was such a gentleman. He was so immensely kind to me and gentle, and just gently teaching me without oppressing me with his knowledge. It was also Michael Powell's last film, so it was a sort of a historic film for film buffs in many ways. It was an amazing experience, shot in Australia on location.
Of course, it was rather revealing film. If any of you have seen it, of course, I can imagine what you were looking at when you saw the film. But I have one funny story to tell about this. My wife, in her first role, did a great deal of the film without her clothes on. And I was making a film called Devil's Advocate here in New York, and I was shooting a sequence that happens in the film in which Keanu Reeves is married to Charlize Theron. And of course, I'd made Charlize Theron look not glamorous, and I had Connie Nielsen was supposed to be the glamorous one. But he's making love to his wife, who's in deep emotional state, but he's fantasizing about Connie Nielsen. And in order to shoot this sequence, I have to have the actresses separate, and he stays in the same place, moving back and forth, and you have a closed set. And during this time, it was in the NFL playoffs. And I'm interested in the playoffs. So I have the actors there, and I'm shooting, and it's very intense. But you have to break, take somebody out, redo it, and come back. And in this sequence, because I'm shooting the same shots with two actresses and the same actor, I've got to it took some time. And meanwhile, since you're doing an intimate scene, the crew has to be off the set. Only very, very select group. So they were off in a room, and of course it's the NFL playoffs, so they're watching the game. And I would be there with the actors, but occasionally when everybody would vacate the set, I'd have a moment, and I'd go over and I'd check the score to see. And this sequence took a long time to shoot. So finally, at the end, I'm getting to the end of the sequence, and I go back in to check because it's in an overtime game, and the game's. I come in to look, and I look at the monitor's here, and all the crew is sitting out there. And I open the door and say, "What's the score?" And they say, "It's over." And he tell me the score. And I say, "Well, why are you guys still sitting here?" And they all went, like this. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And I turned around and looked, and there is my wife, many years before, prancing around on the All Together, in the age of consent. And I shut the television off and said, get out of this room right now. So these things do come back to haunt you.
Oh, they do.
Now, okay, there's one back there.
Hi, I'm interested in domestically how you both support each other through the different stresses that your different roles have. Taylor, your job as a director-producer stretches over a much longer period than Helen, your acting roles. And so you will delve into the next role while Taylor is still working on this one over here. And how do you support each other?
A question about how these two people support each other in the cinematic process, given the very different nature of what they do. The director and producer who has to work as much as a year and a half on something, whereas the actor has a smaller amount of time commitment. But how do you support one another in this process?
We support each other. We give each other freedom to work. We will never say, don't do that because I'm blah, blah. Taylor will always say to me, if you want to do it, do it. And I would always do the same to him. And, we'll find a way around it. We have had to spend an awful lot of our lives apart. And that was the great pleasure of doing Love Ranch. We could actually be together and working, and that was great. But we do spend a lot of our years apart. But that's a necessary part of our relationship because we both know that it's a necessary part of our personal lives to continue our professional lives. And so we support each other in that. We don't criticize each other's work professionally. I mean, sometimes maybe we should, but we don't. Taylor's always incredibly supportive. If I'm in the theatre, Taylor will always come and see me at least 3 or 4 or 5 times and watch the process and be incredibly supportive there. Scheduling is always important. We have to sit down with a calendar about every 2 months and say, okay, what plans have you got? What's coming up for you? And this is what I want to do. And I'm not sure if it's going to happen, but if it does, I'll be 3 months in Hungary or something like that. So, scheduling is, and sharing our scheduling is obviously terribly important. What do you think, Tay?
I think the first thing she said is the most important. I mean, when you work and you're passionate about your work, you're not doing it to be away from home. You're doing it because that's what you do. And if someone sets up a thing of saying you've made a choice to not be with me, that relationship can't last. And to be able to have that process of understanding, I think that the way I explain it is that, when you're young, you idealize what a relationship should be, and you're looking for that perfect thing. And hopefully that exists for some people. I don't think it exists completely in that way. And over the course of time, you start to realize when you find somebody that it may not be perfect, but it's absolutely right. How lucky you are. And I think in this instance, when I found Helen, I realized this is the woman for me. There will not be another. And in that moment of that. Not just attraction, in the sense that she is supportive about what I do, and we both understand that we'd like to be together all the time, but we can't. And that, I think, is the key. And then, of course, it is quite exciting when you come back together.
And just from my own very objective reading, I noticed, watching on television a few years ago, all the times that Helen Mirren would be at an awards ceremony, usually winning. You were there. Taylor Hackford's face was visible on the camera. This is somebody who did come along and, physically support. Absolutely. And I think that's a wonderful thing. Yeah. We don't really have time for more questions. I'm going to just mention 2 things because I know that many of you go to Netflix the next day. We didn't get to talk about some of my favorite Taylor Hackford films, like Proof of Life, which nobody saw, I think, in 2000, but which I strongly recommend, and Bound by Honor, which I watched this past weekend.
Although Blood In, Blood Out is the real title of it.
Blood In, Blood Out.
Well, in the United States, they changed it. It never got a release because the LA riots took. It was made for Disney of all people. Jeff Katzenberg
I know.
was my rabbi, and he basically made the film, but Michael Eisner wasn't happy with it when it was done. Not that he wasn't happy with it, he just didn't think it should go out and risk the Disney name. But try to find that film in any place in the West, where there's a Latin population. You will not find it. It's completely checked out.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
And also, I didn't mention one of my favorite Helen Mirren films, which I presume most of you have seen, which is Calendar Girls.
Yes.
But tonight you will get to see an ample amount of Helen Mirren and of Taylor Hackford's gifts when you see Love Ranch. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.